Thank you everyone for coming today. We're going to go ahead and get started. So first I just wanted to say welcome to our presenters and to our guests, and also to those of you here at McDermott. This is the initial event for our October Pro Bono Month, and we'll have many more events throughout the month, and I hope that you all choose to participate in as many trainings as possible. And so from Equip for Equality, we have presenting Olga Pribble, Cheryl Jansen, and Barry Taylor. They're here with us today to talk about a very important initiative that Equip for Equality has undertaken. And just as a little bit of background, for those of you that don't know, Equip for Equality is the federally mandated protection and advocacy agency for Illinois. And Equip's mission is to advance the human and civil rights of children and adults with disabilities throughout Illinois. Now, in this important and ambitious effort that we're going to talk about today, Equip for Equality has partnered with the Chicago Board of Election Commissioners to help ensure that Chicago's polling places are ADA accessible to people with diverse disabilities and older adults. And so, very excited for this training and hope that we'll all get involved, and I'll turn the time over to our presenters. Thank you, Olga.
Thank you, Jake. So as Jake mentioned, I'm Olga Pribble. I'm the Vice President of Pro Bono at Equip for Equality. Thank you so much for having us here today for our kickoff training for this important initiative, and for inviting our friends from Latham and Watkins to join in as well. So just want to reiterate how important of an initiative this is to make sure that polling places are accessible. The goal is by 2018 to make sure that all polling places in Chicago are accessible for people with disabilities as well as older adults. And so you will be the key to making sure that happens. So without further ado, I'm going to have Cheryl Jansen, who's in charge of our voting initiative, will give the training. There is a sign-up sheet, so hopefully after listening to our training, you'll sign up for Election Day. We have flexibility with, if you sign up for a 4 to 6 hour time slot or a full day time slot, you can do this in partnership with a colleague or a corporate client or a friend, or you can do it by yourself. So if you have questions after the training, we're happy to answer them, but please encourage all your colleagues to join in on this important initiative, because we need 300 to 400 volunteers to make this a success. So thank you again, and with that, Cheryl Jansen.
Good morning, everybody. As Olga said, I'm Cheryl Jansen. I'm the Public Policy Director at Equip for Equality, and our voting rights program is housed within our policy program at Equip. Sorry, it's not advancing. Partnership. So what are we going to do today? Our agenda for today is to talk briefly about what the Voting Access Chicago project is. We're then going to provide an overview of federal voting rights of people with disabilities that's contained in federal legislation, specifically the Americans with Disabilities Act of 1990, the National Voting Rights Act of 1993, and the Help America Vote Act of 2002. That will be followed by a short review of some recent changes in Illinois election law that have expanded opportunities to vote, really for all citizens, but of course for people with disabilities and older adults as well. And then we are going to get into the weeds and go through the actual questions of the polling place accessibility survey. And so, because I realize that there may be questions about the different pieces of the survey, I'll invite questions at the end of each section of the survey so that we can talk about any questions or concerns that you have as we go along. So as you heard from Jake, the Voting Access Chicago project is a partnership with the Chicago Board of Election Commissioners to identify and remedy any barriers to polling place accessibility for people with disabilities and older adults. And so during the survey process, you'll be looking for both temporary and permanent barriers to accessibility. Some of the temporary barriers can be easily fixed. Some will be permanent in nature because there may be structural or architectural features of the polling place that simply could not be addressed on election day. And so you will indicate when you go through the survey whether these are temporary or permanent barriers. This is a very ambitious project. We're going to do a comprehensive survey of about 1,700 polling places in the city of Chicago on Election Day, which is November 8th. And the goal is to ensure that by March of 2018, that all Chicago polling places are fully accessible to people with disabilities and older adults. So let me give you a little background, a little context for this work. People with disabilities historically have been underrepresented at the polls. And it's estimated that there are 46 million people with disabilities of voting age in the United States. But in the 2012 elections, only 15.6 million of those people reported voting. There have been, as we're going to talk about in a minute, several laws and protections that have been put in place at the federal level, which has improved things somewhat. But even so, at least in the 2012 election, the voter turnout rate of people with disabilities was lower than people without disabilities, almost 6% lower. And so the impact or effect of that is that if people with disabilities had voted at the same rate as people without disabilities, there would have been 3 million more voters with disabilities in the 2012 election. And obviously that can have a great impact. So what are some of the barriers to voting for people with disabilities? One of them, and this is, of course, is what we're going to be focusing on Election Day, are inaccessible polling places and inaccessible equipment. Another thing that voters with disabilities, unfortunately, frequently encounter are discriminatory practices and attitudes of election officials and poll workers or election judges, you may hear either term, even the guardians and caretakers of the individuals with disabilities themselves. Transportation has been an ongoing issue for people with disabilities for a variety of reasons. Affordability, accessibility, transportation may not be obtainable for a person with a disability on Election Day. And we're going to talk in a moment about some changes in Illinois law that have given people more flexibility in terms of when and where they vote. But for those who wish to exercise their right to vote on Election Day at their polling place, transportation continues to be an issue. And a very large issue is the lack of knowledge about voting rights. And so people with disabilities themselves lack knowledge. So do family members and guardians of people with disabilities. Election officials and poll workers also may lack knowledge in this area. And I should say that there was a recent study done by a national self-advocacy organization that indicated that election judge training was, like the #1 barrier to people with disabilities voting. So there is great room for improvement there. And also service providers may not have knowledge. And so they may be the gateway to a person with disability being able to exercise their right to vote. They may be the ones who have to take the person to vote or to attain the necessary forms. And so it's important that those people have knowledge about the voting rights of people with disabilities as well. So, federal laws that govern voting rights of people with disabilities. The first is the Americans with Disabilities Act of 1990, or the ADA. And Title II of the ADA requires that people with disabilities have equal access and opportunity to vote, the same as anyone else. So polling places have to comply with ADA requirements that determine the space in which people vote. And so those requirements include guidelines about the width of hallways and doorways, and corridors, and ensuring adequate turning space at the voting machine for people who use a wheelchair or other mobility device. Space for walkways and parking spaces outside the polling place are also defined in these requirements. And these requirements are part of an overall ADA checklist to ensure that the space in and around voting, voting stations comply with federal law. Another federal law pertaining to voting rights is the National Voting Rights Act of 1993. And among other things, this act includes a provision to allow voter registration opportunities at state agencies, some of which serve people with disabilities. But some research shows that state agencies fail to routinely offer voter registration to the people they serve. So this is a barrier. And unfortunately, the federal government generally does not enforce these provisions. The third federal statute is the Help America Vote Act of 2002, and it is frequently referred to as HAVA. And HAVA was passed to address problems that voters encountered both with voting systems and access in the 2000 election. And I know we have a mixed group here, so depending on your age, you may or may not remember that in 2002, when people went to vote and they were using punch cards as their ballot, and they were given an implement to poke out a little slot on the card. But unfortunately, not all of those little slots actually, went all the way through and were missing. And so there was something called hanging chads, which of course impacted how they counted the votes in 2002. And so this was one of the major reasons for the passage of HAVA. And so it's intended to improve access to the electoral process for all United States citizens. But it has very specific provisions for voters with disabilities as well. And so one of those is the requirement that each polling place be accessible to people with disabilities and that it have at least one accessible voting machine. Secondly, people with disabilities must be able to vote privately and independently, just as any other voter would. And I will tell you that from our own experience doing surveys and from reports that we get from people with disabilities, this is one of the major number one barriers when people go to vote on election day. So even if the equipment is present and able to be used, it may be positioned or placed in a way that other voters can see exactly how the voter with disability is working. And so it's an easy fix. It's a matter of turning the machine or turning the table or desk, but frequently it is not set up properly. So this has been a barrier. So Illinois election law. In the past 5 years, we have really done a lot in Illinois to expand opportunities to vote for all citizens of Illinois and the United States. But of course, these will impact and expand opportunities for voters with disabilities and older adults as well. So one of those is that 17-year-olds who are otherwise qualified to vote can register and vote in the primary election, provided that they will turn 18 by the date of the general election. In addition, we now have online voter registration here in Illinois, and so I've included the website if anybody would want to check that out, although I must say that there are some serious problems with the accessibility of that system for people with disabilities, so there's work to be done. We also have something in Illinois called grace period registration and voting. And essentially what this does is there is a deadline to register to vote. This year it's October 11th. So if an individual failed to register to vote by October 11th, they could use this process. It allows you to register to vote or to change your address through Election Day. You can do this on Election Day. And this type of registration is offered at the local election authority's office and at early voting sites. And so the difference between this process and regular registration and voting is that you have to do both at the same time. You're going to register and you're going to vote, as if you're doing a vote by mail ballot. And obviously you can't go to the polling place and vote again on Election Day. We also have greatly expanded the times in which people can do early voting in the state of Illinois. So in the 15 days before the election, you can early vote from 8:30 to 4:30 or 9 to 5 on weekdays. And you would have to contact your local election authority to find out what the hours are in your area. And the 8 days right before the election, it's even greater, and they have to be open from 8:30 a.m. to 7 p.m. or 9 a.m. to 7 p.m. on weekdays, 9 a.m. to 12 p.m. on Saturdays and holidays, and 10 a.m. to 4 p.m. on Sundays. So there are lots of opportunities for people to early vote. We also have vote by mail, which you may know as absentee voting. It's not how it is referred to currently, but it is the same thing. And this, again, is something where you would apply to get a vote by mail ballot. You could do this either in person or by mail. The ballot is delivered to you, you vote your ballot, and you then turn it back into the election authority, either in person or by mail. And unlike former law, right now anyone can vote by mail. You do not need to have a reason or excuse in order to do so. And finally, we now have something called campus voting here in Illinois. In addition to all the other early voting sites that exist, if an election authority has a university within its jurisdiction, then it's required to conduct early voting in a high traffic area on the campus of that university. So again, expanded opportunities and something that would encourage younger people to vote as well. So the survey itself. The survey is a tool that's designed to evaluate the accessibility of the polling place as a whole. So think about the point of arrival to the point of return and exit for voters with disabilities. The tool itself is really a step-by-step checklist, and it looks at the parking area of the polling place, the passenger drop-off area, the exterior route to the accessible entrance, the polling place entrance itself, the route from the entrance into the voting area, then the voting area itself, any ramps that exist at the polling place, and any lifts or elevators that are at the polling place. And I'd like to say that when you're filling out the survey, more information is better. So we'll talk about the format of the survey in just a moment, but if you have any question about how to answer a question, make a note of it on the survey form, because it's something that we can follow up with after the fact, and we'd rather have too much information than not enough. So we would encourage you to make notes and comments.
So I'm just going to interject real quick here. So if you're participating in the volunteer opportunity, you will be given a toolkit, and that'll include the paper survey. So that's what Cheryl's referring to. So there'll be a survey for each location that you're going to, and then you'll also be given some tools. So you'll get a tape measure and you'll get a level.
And we're going to talk about
that.
We're
going to talk about that. So that's what the survey is. So you will have that before you start out on election day. And that'll be something, it's a paper survey. You'll fill it out, and then you'll return the test.
Right. So to use the survey tool effectively, I think it's helpful to consider how and where a person with a disability would arrive at the polling place, approach the polling place, enter the polling place, how they would navigate through the polling place, including the actual voting room or area, and how they would exit the polling place, so that you're looking at accessibility throughout the process. So for each of the areas that we're going to look at on Election Day, the survey contains a list of questions that can be answered by checking yes, no, or not applicable. And it also provides a space to write comments after each question. And so this is the paper survey that Olga was referring to. Some of the questions in the survey will require you to take measurements. And so for this purpose, you will be getting a toolkit, which will include the following: a 24-inch digital level, which I will show you here today. And this is something that you're going to use to measure the slope of surfaces and ramps. You will also receive a door pressure gauge to measure the weight or force of doors. And this is important because to be accessible to people with disabilities, the door cannot have more than 5 pounds of force, or it would not be easily opened by a person with a disability. So we will need this tool. And this is the only tool of the three that I was familiar with, and that is your tape measure. So you will also have a tape measure because there will be occasions for you to measure the width and length and height of things. So I wanted to go through some of the terms that you're going to find in the survey so that you know what they are and what they mean. One of them is van accessible parking space. So it's the same as a regular parking space, except that there are 3 features that are needed by vans. And some people with disabilities may have vans that are equipped with a wheelchair lift, and so that's why there are particular parking spaces for those individuals. So number 1, it has a wider access aisle, 96 inches, to accommodate a wheelchair lift. And we're going to talk about access aisle in a moment. There must also be vertical clearance for the height of the van, as well as in the access aisle that's next to it, and the van route to and from the accessible parking space. It also requires an additional sign that indicates it's a van accessible parking space. So that's something that you will be looking for as you go through. So access aisle. An access aisle is an accessible space that's right next to an accessible parking space or between 2 parking spaces that provides clearance for a person using a wheelchair or other mobility device to maneuver. And we've all seen these. They're very clearly delineated, and they're marked, actually painted with diagonal stripes. That is an access aisle. What's a designated accessible parking space? It's a parking space that's marked with a sign that displays the international symbol of accessibility. And I know that you've all seen that because it contains a graphic of a person using a wheelchair. Accessible route. That is a route of travel that doesn't have any barriers or conditions that would impede or hinder a person with a disability from safely navigating the route. Curb ramp. I imagine most of you know what this is because you will find them all over the city of Chicago or in your own communities. But just in case, it is a transition area that's between the street and the curb that allows people with disabilities to access the sidewalk or the path of travel without any abrupt changes in level. Slope, something that you're going to see, a term you'll see a lot of in the polling place survey. And slope really refers to the proportion of the vertical rise, the height, to the horizontal length of the slope. And under the ADA, it's expressed in terms of ratio. So, for example, 1 to 12. And it may also be expressed by a percentage or in degrees. So one of the things you'll be asked to measure as part of the survey is running slope of a route or a ramp. And the running slope refers to the vertical slope that corresponds with the direction of the path of travel. So if this is a ramp, and this is the direction the person would be going up, then this is the way that you would place the digital level on the ramp in order to measure the running slope. The cross slope then refers to the horizontal slope, and it's measured across the width of the slope. So again, if this is the ramp, for this measurement, you would lay the digital measure this way. Alternative accessible entrance. You may encounter polling places at which the main entrance to the building is not accessible to people with disabilities. Perhaps there are stairs, there are abrupt levels with no ramps, things of that nature. So the alternative accessible entrance refers to the entrance, another entrance to the polling place to be used by voters with disabilities when that main entrance to the polling place isn't accessible. So this may not necessarily kick in at all places, because at some places the main entrance will be the accessible entrance. But if it is not, then you need to look for the alternative. So just wanted to talk a little bit about how the tools work or operate. The digital level, in order to measure slope, as I indicated, the functions are shown in degrees or percentage or inch to foot ratio. And in this PowerPoint, we indicate here that you need to convert the measurement from inch to foot to inch ratio, in anticipation of having a checklist for you to make that conversion. So we've decided to make this a little easier. I will tell you that there are digital levels that are more sophisticated and expensive than the one that we're purchasing, and those actually take the measurement in an inch to inch ratio. The digital level you'll receive will be inch to foot ratio, and so what we're going to do, and I'll talk about this again when we go through the actual survey questions, we are going to convert all the ratios that you see in the survey tool to inch to foot, so you will not have to be making any adjustments, and you can simply record what it is you see on the digital level. And although I really think it's highly unlikely that this would happen, there is a laser at one end of the digital level. The instructions are clear to say, don't stare into the laser. So I'm not sure how you would be measuring and using it and staring into it, but please don't do that. I showed you the door pressure gauge, and so this is something you'll see. You adjust the measurement ring to pounds and to 5 pounds of force, because that's a maximum amount of force that a door could have and still be compliant with ADA standards. And so essentially you take the gauge, you find a spot on the door that's about handle high and about 30 inches away from the door hinge, and then you slowly press the instrument against the door. And then you will have a reading as to the amount of force and pressure of that door. And as I said, to be ADA compliant, the end measurement can't exceed 5 pounds of force.
Michelle, I think we have a typo. Actually, what you're going to do is you're going to adjust it to the 0, and then when you push, you're going to see where it goes from there. So we can pass around the gauge so you can see.
Sure.
But it's basically... On here, they have pounds and they have pounds and kilograms. So you just want to go on the side with pounds, and then it's already set to 0. And then you would push the door open and see how far it goes. And if it goes past 5, well, you would just want to write down what the number is. But if it's past 5, that's too much. So we'll just pass this around and you can get a good look at it.
Sure. And thank you. Thanks, Barry, for clarifying. So now we're going to go through the actual questions that you'll see on the survey. And the first area will be parking. I just want to point out that you'll only need to complete this section if parking is provided to voters with disabilities. And at some polling places, that will be the case, and others, it will not. And so if there is not parking, designated for voters with disabilities, you would simply go to the next section of the survey. But assuming there is that parking, then one of the questions is there at least one designated van accessible space with signage with the international symbol of accessibility and designated van accessible? So you'll be looking to see if that space is there and whether it has the necessary signage. Are the designated van accessible spaces at least 96 inches wide with a 96-inch wide access aisle, or 132 inches wide with a 60-inch wide access aisle? So obviously we'll be using the tape measure for this one. For van accessible spaces, especially in a garage or a parking structure, is there vertical clearance of at least 98 inches for the vehicle route to the parking space, in the parking space itself and the access aisle, and along the vehicle route to the exit? So they just want to make sure that a van that's navigating through this area would not encounter any obstructions. Our designated accessible parking spaces and the access aisle serving them on a level surface, not exceeding 1 to 48 in all directions. So this is one where you would be using the digital level. And as we've indicated, we will have different ratios expressed in the survey so that you will not have to make any conversions. And note that curb ramps cannot be part of an access aisle. Continuing in the parking area, are the surfaces of the designated accessible parking spaces and the access aisles stable, firm, and slip resistant? So you want to look for things like, is there mud? Are there pebbles or gravel? Is there ice that would be a problem for a person trying to navigate this area? And are the designated accessible parking spaces located on the shortest accessible route to the accessible entrance? So if the main entrance isn't the accessible entrance, is the path to get to that alternative entrance a logical one and the shortest way to get there? All right, so that concludes the questions of the survey that pertain to parking. So I just want to stop and see if anyone has any questions at this point. And I realize there's lots to digest, so feel free to, contact us afterwards if things occur to you.
And so just so people know, like when we're talking about it's the space, you're literally putting it on the ground and having to, wear some pants or something like that that are easy to get down and look and see what the level is. Because we're basically just checking to see all these different surfaces. And when we're talking about the parking area, it literally is the ground where people are going to be getting out to make sure that there isn't any unwarranted slope.
Right, and I think that to be on the safe side, any surface you're examining, use the level, because it may be that there, even though it's not perceptible to your eye, that there is some slope that might be of concern. So use the level whenever you're asked to calculate that. So now we're going to move on to the questions of the survey that relate to the passenger drop-off area. Again, not all polling places will have a passenger drop-off area. And if there is one, it will most likely be marked or delineated with orange traffic cones near the polling place entrance. But assuming that there is a passenger drop-off area, here are the questions that you're going to be looking at. Is a curb ramp provided if a curb separates the access aisle from the accessible route to the accessible entrance? Is the width of the curb ramp surface at least 36 inches, not counting the side flares, so not counting the sloped areas that go up from the curb ramp? Does an accessible route connect the access aisle and the curb ramp to the accessible entrance of the polling place? And this set of questions you will see repeatedly throughout the survey, but I'm sorry. So now we're making a transition to another area. So any questions about the passenger drop-off area at this point? Okay. So the next part of the survey relates to the exterior route to the accessible entrance of the polling place. And as I was about to say, this series of questions will be asked in a number of different areas. but things that are easily computed. Is the route at least 36 inches wide? Is it free of abrupt changes in level that are greater than 1/2 inch? So is the route free of openings that are larger or greater than 1/2 inch, such as in a grate, because we don't want to have anything that someone could get caught up in and not be able to pass safely. And are walking surfaces stable, firm, and slip resistant? So another thing you look at is the route free of wall-mounted objects? So objects that are actually adhered to the wall or the pathway that protrude 4 inches or more into the path of travel, between 27 inches and 80 inches high. And so here's the significance of the 27 inches and the 80 inches. If a person is blind or they have low vision and they use a cane to navigate, they can't detect barriers or obstructions with the cane that are more than 27 inches above the ground. So that's why we look for this. Or anything else up to 80 inches high. So beyond that point, most people are not that tall and it would not be a factor. But that's why we're looking for these measurements. Is the route free of post-mounted objects? Say something that's on a pole that protrudes more than 12 inches into the path of travel. Again, between 27 inches and 80 inches high. And are objects that hang over the pedestrian route 80 inches or higher, including the underside of exterior stairs. So if there are exterior stairs and there is an open underside to that stairway, there should be some kind of barrier so that a person who is using a cane to navigate would know that that is not something that they should not proceed in that direction. So that's what we would be looking for. If the route crosses a curb, is there a curb ramp that's 36 inches wide with a slope no more than 1 to 12? And as I said, we will be having different ratio numbers on the actual survey so that you can simply record what the digital level says. If the slope part of the ramp is greater than 1 to 20, or there are steps, is there a ramp? And if there is a ramp, then you just go on to section F, to the section that relates to the area, the interior area within the voting place. And finally, is the cross slope of the accessible route no greater than 1 to 48? So all things that you'd be using the digital level for. Any questions regarding that section thus far? I know it's a lot of detail to absorb.
So I missed one from
Sure.
the last section. When you say slip resistant, obviously ice and mud and all that's obvious. But
Right.
Are you looking for anything in particular, you know, like the plastic bump things that go down ramps or kind of grooves in the concrete, or is it just it's only the external type stuff?
Well, there will be questions about this for things on the interior as well. So you have to think about where you are at the time. So obviously, you know, the factors or possible barriers are going to be different outside than they might be inside. So,
Okay, but it defines what slip resistant is in a particular circumstance?
No, because it's really a matter of using your judgment and common sense. So you just have to look at the area and say, you know, is there anything about this that would make it slippery? That would, you know, which is why I use the example of pebbles or gravel. Likewise, if there was mud, somebody using a mobility device would have difficulty, you know, navigating through that.
The concrete itself, or it doesn't have to have any particular characteristic?
No. So you just have to just look at that particular area and see if there are any conditions that you see that you think would be problematic for a person with disability. Mm-hmm. Okay, so now we're going to move on to the polling place entrance questions. Is the width of the clear door opening, or one door, or one side if there are double doors, at least 32 inches wide, so that a person could get through? Is the door hardware usable with one hand and without tight grasping, pinching, or twisting of the wrist? And so this really goes to people who might have some kind of dexterity impairment And so I think that the best way to make this determination is, could it be opened using a closed fist? And if it could not, then you would answer no here.
Often on these kind of things, like in schools, you'll see those that require you to push the thumb down to open up those kind of handles, and that's going to be really hard for somebody who has any kind of gripping issue. So that's going to be the main sort of culprit, is that, as well as like the heavy doors you can't open up with your fist. And literally, if you just go in with your fist and try to pull it and just sort of simulate it, what it would be like, you'll be able to answer that one easily.
Yeah.
And the door handles here are perfect examples of what an accessible door handle would look like. So.
Yay! Yeah. And on the pull side of the door, the side that you're opening the door with, is there at least 1.5 foot of clearance provided to the side of the latch, so a person would have enough room when pulling the door open to navigate around? Is the area in front of the door level, not exceeding a slope greater than 1 to 48 in all directions? So again, we'll be using the digital level here. If there are doors in a series, one door after another, is the distance between the two hinged doors at least 48 inches, plus the width of the doors that swing into the space. So again, an additional space is required so that a person would have enough room to maneuver and navigate when opening the door. And can the second door, the interior door in this series, be opened with less than 5 pounds of force? So this is something you use the door pressure gauge for.
And the second, if you go back, Cheryl,
Sure.
I found sort of the second one a little confusing. Literally, you need to open up the door if it goes into the space, and then measure the 48 from the open end of the open door, if that's not clear. If the door comes in, you wouldn't have to worry about that. You just have to worry about the 48. But if the door goes into the space where the next door is, your measurement would go at the end of the door once it's open into the new space.
Mm-hmm. So now, any other questions about that part of the survey? Okay, so now we're going to talk about the route from the entrance into the voting area itself.
I have one.
Go ahead, Jake.
If the door has one of those handicap buttons you can push and it opens automatically,
Yes.
do we have to indicate that anywhere on here? Do we still measure the force of the door to open?
Well, I think you would want to test to make sure that it operates.
Okay.
And assuming that it does, I would just make a notation on the survey to indicate that there is an automatic, the ability to open the door automatically and that it is operated and functioning.
Okay.
The ADA doesn't technically require automatic doors, and so that's why that's not on the Department of Justice survey, but that's a great question, and maybe something that we might just want to add for people to know if there was a door and whether it was working, an automated door.
Sure. Yeah, and based upon the questions we got, we're going to be making adjustments to the survey so that it makes more sense and is easier to do.
And when I've done these surveys, the buttons have not worked, so that's why when Cheryl said test to make sure they
Right.
work.
You have to test it.
If you have them and they're not working, it doesn't
Yeah,
work.
yeah. It's no consequence if it doesn't work. So the route from the entrance into the voting area, is the route at least 36 inches wide? Is it free of wall-mounted objects that protrude 4 inches or more into the path of travel and are between 27 inches and 80 inches high? The same question for post-mounted objects that protrude more than 12 inches into the path of travel and are between 27 and 80 inches high. And are objects that hang over the pedestrian route 80 inches or higher, including the underside of stairs. So again, for a person who is blind or has low vision, this is an issue, and so we have to make sure that those things are high enough up that it would not be problematic. Is the route free of abrupt changes in level greater than 1/2 inch? So you would use the tape measure. If the slope of part of the route is greater than 1 to 20, or there are steps, is there a ramp? And if there is a ramp, go to section F in the survey, which is within the voting area. If the route to the voting area has stairs, is a lift or an elevator provided? And if the answer to that question is yes, then you'll proceed to section H and answer the questions regarding lifts, or to section I and answer the questions regarding elevators. If doors are provided along the route to the voting area, is the clear width of at least one door no less than 32 inches? Is the door hardware operable with one hand and operable without tight grasping, pinching, or twisting of the wrist? So again, can it be used and operated with a closed fist? And again, can the door be opened with 5 pounds of force or less? Is the threshold at the door no higher than 1/2 inch? So, and if it's between 1/4 of an inch and 1/2 inch, it must be beveled. So you don't want any abrupt changes in level in the threshold that might impede someone from passing through. On the pole side of the door, is there 18 inches of clearance provided beyond the latch, again, to allow additional space for someone to navigate through the door when opening it? And is the area in front of the door level, not exceeding a slope greater than 1 to 48 in all directions? So you want to check, even if you think, looking at it, that there is not a slope. Please just slap down that digital level and check it out. So now any questions on this section? We're good? Okay. So now we're going to within the voting area, meaning the room where you actually go to vote. Are the walking surfaces stable, firm, and slip resistant? So obviously you might be looking for different things on the inside than you would on the outside. But I would say use your common sense judgment here. Is the circulation path free of wall-mounted objects that protrude 4 inches or more into the path of travel and are between 27 inches and 80 inches high? And is that route free of post-mounted objects that protrude more than 1 foot into the path of travel and are between 27 and 80 inches high? Are objects that hang over the circulation path 80 inches or higher, including the underside of stairs? Is there enough room to provide a route at least 36 inches wide to the registration table and voting booths? And so when you're responding to this question, you need to be thinking of, are there any obstacles or barriers that a person with a disability would have to encounter from the point at which they go into the voting area to the registration table and voting booths? Then a lot of these things are just maybe temporary barriers that can be easily fixed, but they're things that you need to note if they have placed equipment or things that would impede someone from having full access to all areas. And is there enough room to provide a turning space in front of at least one voting machine or voting booth, such as a circle that is 60 inches in diameter? So in addition to having electronic accessible voting machines, polling places will have voting booths that are lowered for people who are using a wheelchair or other mobility device. And so there needs to be adequate space in either at the machine or at that lower booth for someone to navigate and maneuver. Are the accessible voting machines and stations positioned in such a way as to afford voters with disabilities the same amount of privacy afforded to other voters? And as I indicated when we started, this is, a very common barrier that we encounter, but also something that can be very easily remedied. So it's something you definitely want to take heed of. Is there at least one accessible writing surface or voting station that's provided where the surface is 28 to 34 inches high? Knee space is at least 27 inches high, and it's at least 30 inches wide. Again, this would be for someone who needs to be seated or is using a wheelchair or other mobility device. And is there at least one accessible electronic voting machine provided where the surface, again, is 28 to 34 inches high, there's adequate knee space of at least 27 inches, and it's at least 30 inches wide?
I just want to clarify here that you're actually looking at two different things. One is somebody who just needs an accessible booth, and it's using the regular sort of ballot that everybody else is using. And that, oftentimes what we find in some places, they don't even set that up. Every polling place has one of these booths, so if they haven't set it up, that's something we need to know. And then the other is this electronic machine that Cheryl was talking about, so that people who are blind can vote independently. And those have to also have the same sort of accessibility components, because you might have somebody who's in a wheelchair and blind. So we want to make sure that's accessible. So the machine is accessible, and then this booth is accessible. So there's two different kind of things that you're looking at here.
Mm-hmm. Any questions about that piece of it? Okay, so we'll go on to ramps. We'll be looking at the running slope of the ramp, which to be ADA compliant cannot be greater than 1 to 12. Is the cross slope of the ramp 1 to 48 or less? Again, the ratios are going to be different on the survey that you'll have, but it gives you an example of how it would be expressed. Is the rise for any ramp the height of any ramp run 30 inches or less, because you don't want that ramp run to be too steep? Is the ramp width measured between the handrails of the ramp at least 36 inches wide, so that someone can easily navigate? And does the ramp have a level landing at the top and the bottom of each ramp section that's at least 60 inches long? So again, there needs to be space for a person who uses a wheelchair or other mobility device to be able to maneuver or turn.
And the tricky thing about this one is just with measuring slope, but you're also measuring how high the ramp is. And so when she says that 30 inches, you're literally taking out your tape measure from the lowest part of the ramp to the highest part of the ramp. Because what they're saying is they don't want any ramp to be more than 30 inches as far as the height of it.
At any point.
At any point of it.
And I should also say that when you're measuring the running slope of a ramp or the cross slope of a ramp, take your measurement at the highest point or the steepest point of the ramp, because then you'll be assured of having the proper measurement, because that would be the top, the very top. So look for the steepest point of your ramp or surface, and then take your measurement there. Again, for every 30 inches of rise or 30 inches of height is a level landing at least 60 inches long provided. And this is so that if a ramp, to keep a ramp from becoming too steep, a level landing has to be provided every time that the height of the ramp goes up another 30 inches. Is a level landing that's at least 60 inches by 60 inches provided where a ramp changes direction? So if you've got a ramp that's going straight up and then the ramp goes to the left or to the right, there has to be an area where a person using a mobility device, such as a wheelchair, could maneuver and make that turn. Are handrails provided that are between 34 inches and 38 inches above the ramp surface? So you want to be sure that someone who's using a wheelchair or other mobility device would be able to reach and use the handrails safely. And if the ramp or the landing has a vertical drop-off on either side of the ramp, is edge protection provided? So there may be ramps that are enclosed with a wall on each side. There may be ramps where there is a wall on one side of the ramp, and there may be ramps where there is no wall or barrier on either side of the ramp. And that's what we're talking about here. If there's at least one side at which there is no barrier, or both sides are unprotected, that's what we're getting at here. And I should tell you that if there are multiple ramps at a polling place, then you'll have to complete the ramp section or the ramp form for each of those ramps. Any questions about ramps? Okay, so on to lifts. Obviously, we want to make sure that the lift can be operated on election day. So you want to make sure that it can be used. Is the lift independently operable, or can it be made so during election day? So is it locked? Is it something that the voter with a disability could use themselves without having to call for assistance or find someone to assist them? Is there 30 inches by 48 inches of clear floor space within the lift? Again, there has to be adequate room to maneuver and turn. And are the controls for the lift no higher than 48 inches? As with doors, are the controls operable without tight grasping, pinching, or twisting? Can they be operated using a closed fist? And is there a clear opening width of the door or the gate at the end of the lift that's at least 32 inches wide? And if there's a side door or gate provided in the lift, is the clear opening width at least 42 inches wide? And the reason for the difference in these measurements is, in some cases, there may be a lift that you enter one way but exit another way. And so for a person who's using a wheelchair or other mobility device, they would have to make a turn in order to use that side gate or entrance. And so they would need additional space to be able to do that. So that's why you're taking those different measurements. Any questions concerning lifts? Okay. Elevators. Is the elevator car door opening at least 36 inches wide? And is there space to maneuver within the elevator car if you're a person who uses a mobility device? And so for this purpose, we're going to ask you to measure the width and depth of the elevator car. Are the hallway elevator call buttons 48 inches high or lower? So again, a person using a mobility device would be able to reach and operate them. And also on the interior of the elevator, are the controls 48 inches high or lower? So you need to look at whether the elevator has visible and audible signals in the hallway to indicate the arrival and direction of elevator cars. And the reason this is important is because if there are people who are deaf or hard of hearing, they need visible signals in order to know about whether the elevator is available and in which direction it's going. And similarly, for people who are blind or have low vision, there need to be audible signals. So for the first instance, the visible signal may be a light that goes on. And for the second instance, as we frequently hear, there is some kind of a ding or a bell that would be heard. And so also, does the elevator have those same things, visible and audible signals within the elevator cars to indicate the position of the car? Any questions about elevators?
I just want to add one thing. I know the survey feels very detailed and long, but most polling places aren't going to have all these things. So it's unlikely to have an elevator and a lift and ramps and things like that. Most of them are just going to be places where you go in, and the main thing you're measuring is the approach, the door in, and the space inside. And then some of these others, you'll just skip a lot of these things. So
right.
If you're getting nervous about, this thing's like a lot of details, we're sort of giving you the most complicated scenario that you'll encounter, but most of these places you're not going to have to do all these measurements because they just won't apply.
That's very true. That's very true.
And most polling places take, the Department of Justice does them, they take 15 minutes. I think they told us when we did them a little less than 30 minutes each place. So you can gauge that you're not going to have all these factors.
Yeah. So having gone through the survey, let's talk a little bit about preparing for Election Day itself and what you can expect to receive in order to do the surveys.
You have a question?
Yeah,
Oh, sorry, I didn't see you.
Sorry, I had a couple of questions
Yeah.
about the survey.
Sure.
It seemed very much geared toward traditional handicap access. Are there questions that will pertain to someone that might be using a cane, an elderly person who couldn't stand in line for a long time? Because in my experience, frequently there are long lines. Or someone who might have difficulty standing in a polling booth. And you talked about the lower polling booth.
Right.
Someone with a cane might need to be able to have, say, bars to rest on while voting, et cetera, or is that just something that's not required? And
well, there's nothing in the ADA standards specifically to that, but of course these questions anticipate that there may be someone who needs to sit and when they vote, even if it's not because they use a wheelchair or a mobility device, or because they may tire if they have to stand for too long of a period of time. So in that event, these same things, the lowered voting booth or having a chair where the accessible voting machine is, would allow those people to be able to vote privately and independently.
okay, because I would just advocate that's very important. I volunteer at the Rehab Institute, and a lot of people have ADA issues that aren't in a wheelchair.
Right, right.
And I think, your point is really well taken, and I think there's certainly ADA issues when it comes to people who have mobility issues that aren't related to a wheelchair. For the survey purposes, we're not reporting that, but if you were to observe somebody, not accommodating somebody, we'd love for you to take notes and give us any comments and feedback about what you observe that may go beyond the survey. And there are some other issues like how level things are and the path of travel. Are there big holes and things like that would apply to people who are using canes or walkers as well, that might play. But as you're right, the technical standards may not apply to some folks, but if you see some things that raise concerns, please let us know.
Mm-hmm. Good point, very good point.
The other thing I just address is facilities like for restroom facilities for people with disabilities. Is that something that is not required to be at the polling places?
Well, that's a good question.
They're taking transportation and then they go.
Right, I agree with you. And so the ADA standards and checklists do not address this. I mean, as a general matter, if it's a place of a public building, a public accommodation, then they would need to adhere to accessibility standards for that building. But this particular survey does not address that. It's not something that DOJ looks at when it assesses the actual polling place. Did you have anything you wanted to add, Barry?
Yeah, I think that's right. Just because polling places are one day only, and they're not going to put that requirement on places that are polling places. But when they're open for other purposes, the ADA kicks in for the restrooms. So
sure.
They certainly have obligations, but it's separate from their obligations under voting. It's one-day nature.
And you have to think that, at least in the city of Chicago, sometimes a polling place is a private residence or, a private club. And so they may not be subject to the same requirements. And so I think that's probably another reason why this isn't part of it. But yes, it is temporary.
Churches are another one that we see.
Yes.
Churches agree to open their church for the day of voting. If their bathrooms are inaccessible, they don't feel like it should, because churches are exempt from the ADA generally, unless they open themselves up for something like voting. And so there was just this, perhaps a political decision that we're not going to require places that open their doors for the day of voting to have accessible restrooms. Everything else has to be accessible, but not the restrooms.
Mm-hmm. Good question. Yeah.
To what extent can a polling judge or a human being address a deficiency just under the law? Like if the door pressure, if the door is too hard to open, but there's a person there that's opening the door. I assume we just note that, but does that solve ADA issues with respect to the door?
No, not. Well, you can do things to make a place temporarily accessible. For instance, a door could be propped open. But it's something that you'd want to call to the attention of one of the election judges or poll workers so that happens. Sometimes doors that are a problem, you may see a temporary doorbell to alert election judges to the fact that somebody is at the door and will need assistance. But the end goal of this whole project is to make sure that on a permanent basis, these places are fully accessible.
So if the door, you're a great example, if the door's open, it's wedged open, our job is to unwedge it, measure it, and then put it back. As opposed to saying, door's wedged open, so it is accessible.
Yes. Yes.
And I guess, so then is our role sort of two prongs, one, filling out the survey, and then two, working with the election judges to sort of take any interim measures they can to increase accessibility on election day?
And there are times when we have definitely done that and attempted to troubleshoot and try and fix things on the spot. That's not really the focus of this survey. And so we're simply going to go through and assess using these ADA standards. But please make a note if there's anything you observe along those lines, because that's something we can definitely follow up with the election officials about. Anyone else? Okay, well, thank you so much. We greatly appreciate it.
Preparation,
Oh, I'm so sorry. I got sidetracked. Okay, so preparation for Election Day. Rah. Okay. So what you will receive from us prior to Election Day, all the tools and supplies that you will need. So you will get a bag of goodies that includes a digital level and a door pressure gauge and a tape measure and a clipboard and pens and a tote bag to put them all in. You will also get your actual polling place assignments so that you know where it is that you are going to conduct surveys, and a supply of the actual polling place survey forms. We're also going to get parking permits from the Chicago Board of Elections so that you can park in places and spaces that otherwise you couldn't without getting a ticket, because you would probably spend a lot of time looking for parking that you could use otherwise. So that's something that we will be getting from them to make that process easier and quicker. And the other thing that you will get and that you absolutely need are something called poll watcher credentials. This is a form that we will get from the Chicago Board of Elections. It's something that you will need to fill out and present to one of the election judges in the polling place at every polling place you go to. And if you're in a polling place that has more than one precinct, you need to give one of those forms to an election judge for every precinct. So you will be filling out quite a few of these, but this is what gives us authorization to be in there and to do what we're doing. So that's very important. And I would suggest that this is something that you would, well, if you're going in a pair, I would say that one of you could go in and give it to the election judge at the very beginning. If you're on your own, you would just wait until you get to the voting area and present it to the election judge. But in the end, it's important that they have it, and I don't think the exact when of it is a real issue. If you're going with someone else, if you have a partner, then you'll each need to submit a credential form to the election judges. So keep that in mind. And the other thing that we're going to include in this bag of goodies and the information that you'll get are phone numbers that you can call for assistance on election day, because I'm sure that questions may come up that we haven't thought of or that you don't feel prepared for, and so you will definitely have access to us on election day. So if anything comes up that you have questions or concerns about, you'll be able to reach us so that we can resolve them. Finally, after election day, we would like you to return all of the survey tools and your completed survey forms to us by November 15th of 2016. So that's a week after Election Day. And we will also provide to you notice of optional briefing sessions so that after we digest all of the survey information and plans are made about how to address any barriers that were identified, you'll have an opportunity to hear about that. And so I think sometimes after you go through something like this, it's really neat to find out exactly what kind of an impact it had. And so you would be welcome to come to these, and we'll let you know when those are. So I think
for the first bullet point, I think what we might want to do, Jake, is just coordinate with, maybe have everybody turn them into one central place, and then we can work on getting them delivered from there.
Right, that's absolutely fine.
Right, so we'll coordinate with the different law firm partners and our corporate partners. So I already talked to Jake about setting something up here at McDermott. I'll talk to Latham about setting something up over there as well. So
we can send out an email to all the volunteers here about where to drop stuff off after you finish.
And then we'll also bring all the tools here too, so you'll pick them up on site here as well. So the toolkits.
Right, and the survey forms and all of that. So you'll get the whole kit caboodle.
And we'll get that to you beforehand. And so if you have questions as you go through your kit before Election Day, you want to reach out to us, we'll have that available.
Yes,
too.
yes.
You may go through and think, I just want to get this clarified before we go out in the field. So
right.
That'll give you a little bit of time. So we need actually you to fill out 2 forms today. So you'll be getting CLE credit for this 1.5 hours of CLE credit. We are going to provide for professional responsibility credit. As some of you know, you have to apply for that as an automatic. So the hope is that we qualify and we can let you know afterwards. But for us to remain to be a CLE provider, we need folks to fill out their evaluation form. And then for us, the most critical form is the one that says Election Day volunteer sign-up information. So if you, after hearing all this, are interested in doing this, if you could fill that out with your name, your email address, your cell phone in case we need to reach you in the field that day. Are you going to be doing this with another person? If so, if you have somebody on your mind, let us know. And then do you have a car or not? employers let us know you're in McDermott, and then you have two options as far as shifts. You can do a 4 to 6 hour shift or an 8-hour shift. What we're imagining is, as Olga indicated, that it'll take you about a half hour for each polling place. And so for the 4 to 6 hour folks, we're looking at probably giving you probably 8 polling places to go to. And for the 8-hour, we're looking at somewhere from 14 to 16. We're going to sort of finalize that when we get a little closer. So, and of course, as I think Olga indicated this at the beginning, the polls are open from 6 a.m. to 7 p.m. So when you do your shift really doesn't matter to us. So if you wanted to do it starting at 6 and be done by 10, that's great. If you want to wait till the end of the day, that's fine too. It's really up to you on when you do your shift. The request is just to be able to complete all the different surveys that you are given.
But I would say if you want an opportunity to be there when there are more voters present, early morning or around the end of the workday are good times for that to happen. But of course, you have total flexibility, but I just thought I would let you know that in case you want to figure that into your schedule.
When will we find out what area we'll be assigned to?
So we're hoping to do that about a week in advance to get along with the tools. Then you will get your assignments and the surveys, etc. So
November 1st is when we anticipate delivering everything to
yeah. So you'll have a week's lead time.
So it's not tied to any, like, where you live or anything like. You could be
No.
an hour away, or you could be 2 minutes away.
Right.
Because we have so many polling sites, and we're logistically to fit in all the volunteers that we're getting. If someone has special considerations that they want us to take into account, let us know, and you can put that on the form.
You can write this at the bottom if there's something.
Yeah, if there's something specific that some needs that you have or something like that, but otherwise, we're hoping people will be, happy to go with.
Yeah, I was thinking shelter stuff.
Yeah.
That'd be great. And then we're also having trainings across the city through the month of October, also in our offices. So I will be sending out emails to the regional coordinators. So Jake and Elizabeth will be getting it here. So if you have friends or colleagues who are interested in doing this and couldn't make it today, there's other opportunities for them to come to training during the month of October. So please encourage everyone to join us in this effort.
Yeah.
Folks have to go through a training before they can do the volunteering, so
Right.
we just need to make sure folks do that first.
So we recorded this. Would it be acceptable to you guys if we just share the video of this and
It
ask
is.
people to
Yeah, our
watch
CLE
it?
registration has us be able to do live as well as recorded trainings.
Okay.
So all we would need them to do, I think we're going to coordinate that with Jake, but I think what we'll probably do is post it on our YouTube channel, and then they could access that, and we just need to shoot me an email saying, I promise I watched the whole training, so that they can get their CLE credit. And then somehow maybe what we can do is leave you guys these forms, or you guys can make some extra copies, and then they can fill those out along with the evaluations. Those are the two main things we need back from folks. But the recording is really great, and we just want to thank you very much for doing this, because you're our first training, and so this is going to be helpful as we go to other firms as well.
Go ahead.
You said you have between 8 and 14 sites you're going to be at. Are they all going to be clustered together?
Yeah,
Yes.
definitely. And some of them,
Taking public transportation instead of driving. So.
right, if somebody indicates that they're doing that, we would obviously keep that in mind, and there are, within some places, walking distance in neighborhoods, you can reach most of them without having to even necessarily do public transportation, but that'll be taken into account, especially if somebody doesn't have a car.
Right.
But
So-
they all will be in the same general location, so no matter.
We're not going to do like north side, south side. west side.
Yeah,
Yeah.
we'll cluster them all together. So, some will be closer than others in distance to each other, but they'll all be in the same general area.
Right.
And what you'll notice, some places have multiple polling places within, one space, and so we'll have you confirm, because you might have to go over to different parts, which one you've gone to, which specific precinct.
Yes.
Are there any security issues that people think about with certain neighborhoods, or issues in that regard, or?
Yeah, one of the reasons we wanted to have the parking passes is so that people could park right in front of the polling place, so that would be, an issue. You're not walking around areas beyond sort of the place. And we encourage people to go early. I think that if you're assigned an area that is of concern, that I think the earlier the better. Those kinds of neighborhoods might be an option to think about. And then we've been told by the Chicago Board of Elections that they do have police out and security guards out in force on Election Day. That's actually one of their lowest crime days compared to some other days that you might think of for whatever reason. And as always said, if people have special considerations that, there's certain places they're just unwilling to go to, you just need to let us know so that we can take that into account.
Okay, well, if there aren't any other questions, I just want to thank you all for your attention, because I know that this is a very detailed information and survey we went through, and I really appreciate it. And this is a very large undertaking, but I hope we've conveyed that it's a really important undertaking, and so we would greatly appreciate your help. Thanks so much.
Thank you, everyone.
And I will leave the level up here if anyone would like to look at it. Just don't stare into the laser.